I can't tell you how many conversations I've had in this room that have changed my life. And one conversation in particular I want to tell you about, and it's not as serious of a conversation as you're probably thinking. About 3 years ago, I had a conversation in this room that forever changed my financial trajectory in life. In the back rows in 2021, I'd just gotten into stock trading, and I was talking to my friend, Pat Erzinger, and he's in the back there in the studio. You can look at him and make him feel uncomfortable. But Pat is one of, if not the most brilliant person I know. And he had just gotten back into stock trading as well, so I obviously was like, what are you investing in? What do you think is going to go up? And we talked about all sorts of things, and the thing that he was most passionate about was this stock called GameStop. And I couldn't figure out why he was so passionate about it. For those of you who don't know what GameStop is, it's a store where you go and buy video games, and this was 2021. COVID, nobody's going to stores, and he's like, Carter, you gotta invest in GameStop. Like, this is the one that's gonna go like to the moon. And I was like, I don't know, Pat, like that doesn't sound like a winning investment. But something about like Pat's passion for it, I was like, I think he's right. So I went home and I bought like 10 shares of GameStop, which was a lot of money for me at the time. It was like $100 or like $200. It was a big risk. And it was like $14 or $15 a share at the time. And in the next couple of weeks, it went up like $2. And I was like, Pat was right. He nailed it. I sold, I went and bought sushi, I went to a movie. I was like, Pat, you crushed it. Like, this was awesome. And if you know the story of GameStop, 2 weeks later, it went to $400 a share, which was pretty bad. It didn't make me feel good, and I've done the math, and I got to be honest, I don't know if I'd be standing on this stage if I had kept that money. I think I'd be like in like Barbados or something. But with that conversation, it makes me think of all the things that I just missed. Hopefully you're not as financially irresponsible as me. And hopefully if you ever hear Pat recommend a stock, take the advice. But I think all of us have a moment like that. Like, for me, I was 6 in 2008, but instead of Pokemon cards, I should have been buying a house, right? Like, there are things that it's just like, man, if I had known at the time, like, what to do, I would have done it. And I wish that was just financial, right? But there are so many things in life that if we could just go back and do it over again. If somebody had just given you the right advice at the right time, if somebody had just told you what to say to your significant other, if somebody just would have told you how to be a better son, brother, friend, dad, if you could just go back, have you ever missed it? Have you ever missed the reason for something? Have you ever missed that big opportunity? We sung some pretty fun songs. I love Christmas time. And we're headed into a new series called Reasons for the Season. And the reason I'm mentioning it is because I don't want you to miss it. Christmas is an awesome time, and it's a time where a lot of people show up to church, and we're really excited that you're here. But what we're going to start this series off with is the reason for what we're doing. And it's not just to get a bunch of people in a room and sing good songs, which is all awesome. And I don't want you to think that I don't love Christmas, because I love Christmas. It's the best. But the reason for the season is that we don't want you to miss out on what God has for your life. The reason for the season is not just that Jesus was born, but that Jesus came so that you wouldn't miss it. So that you wouldn't miss the reason for life. All the weight that you may be carrying as you walk in today, the things that you've missed out on, the things that you wish you could go back and do over, and the things that you're struggling with now. Jesus is the reason for this season. He is here to lift that weight from you. He's here to take that sin away. And we're going to start today with the start of the Christmas story. And I kind of just gave away the whole message, so if you want to leave now, you can. Jesus is great. But we're going to start at the start of the Christmas story, which doesn't begin where you think it does. It doesn't begin with Joseph and Mary. It begins 4,000 years ago with a different couple named Abram and Sarai. So if you have your Bibles, you can flip to Genesis chapter 12, or if you have the Bible on your phone. And just to give you a little context, this is 4,000 years ago. God selects Abram, who later becomes Abraham. That's just like a weird thing that God does sometimes. He just switches somebody's name so that it gets confusing when you talk about them in two different times. But he sees Abram as a righteous man, and he selects him to bless. He says, you're going to be the person that I bless the nations through. And so God begins by saying this: I will make you into a great nation, to Abram. I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. Real quick, just by a show of hands, who's ever heard of Abraham, like from the Bible? Hey, he did it. He made him famous, right? 4,000 years later, most of you know who that is, which is pretty cool. And so he says this, and he continues, I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families on the earth will be blessed through you. All the families on the earth. God begins the story of blessing you 4,000 years ago. Through this one man and his family, he is making a promise that he is going to bless everyone through him. Now, the problem with this is he's saying this to Abram, and Abram's 90 years old, and he doesn't have a kid yet. And his wife is 90 years old and doesn't have a kid yet. And if you know anything about general biology, probably not a good chance that they're going to have a kid, right? But Abraham replied, O sovereign Lord, what are all your blessings when I don't even have a son? You're telling me that you're going to bless my family, but my family's going to end soon. Then the Lord said to him, no, your servant will not be your heir, meaning you're not just going to pass this down to your next of kin that isn't related to you. For you will have a son of your own who will be your heir. I'm gonna do a miracle through you, and then through that miracle, I'm gonna do countless more. Then the Lord took Abraham outside and said, look up into the sky and count the stars if you can. That's how many descendants you will have. God looks at a 90-year-old man with no kids, and he walks him out, and hopefully you've experienced a perfect night sky. Now, because of the power plants we have in our area, the night sky is a little dim around us, but hopefully you've been to like farm towns. And I do love the power plants. Shout out to all people working in power plants here. They're great. My best friend works at one. They're wonderful, but they kind of, the night sky doesn't look as great. Hopefully you've been and you've seen just a mass of stars. And the Lord takes Abraham to look at a mass of stars. And he says, it doesn't look like it right now, Abraham. You're 90, you have no kids, but this is how many descendants you're going to have. And what's so cool is then in the next verse, and Abram believed the Lord. He had no kids, he was 90 years old, but he believed. He believed in the blessing of God, in what God could do past what he thought possible. And the Lord counted him as righteous because of his faith. And this is where the story begins. Now, to the difficult part of the message. We can throw up the night sky here. I was given a message where I was told that I should sum up the Old Testament in 5 minutes. So over the next 5 minutes, I'm going to give a real brief overview of what God does through the next 2,000 years. I'm going to miss some stuff, and it might not all make sense in the moment. But if you have the time, go read the Old Testament. It's like really good. Tara Lee Cobble does a great job. Bible recap, like over the next 200 days, it's like the best story ever. But I'm just going to give you a real quick 5-minute, here's what God did through Abraham. So, first, God comes through on what he said, and he gives Abraham a son. His son's name is Isaac, and Isaac inherits that blessing, and then immediately has 2 sons after that, Jacob and Esau. It's a cool story there. Don't have time to go into that. Then Jacob has 12 sons. Those 12 sons become the nation of Israel, and one of those 12 sons gets sold into slavery. Don't have time to go into that story either. But he ends up in Egypt. Then all of them end up in Egypt because of a famine. And then in Egypt, they multiply like crazy. There then becomes thousands of Israelites, and the people of Egypt get nervous. These Israelites are growing, and they think that the Israelites are going to take Egypt from them. So then they put all of them in slavery. And if you've ever seen the movie Prince of Egypt, you know where this one's going. They then get led out of Egypt by Moses, and from that get to the Promised Land. Now, in the Promised Land is called the Promised Land because it's where God delivers his people out of slavery, and you'd think, now they figure it out, right? Now they get it. Like, God was good, but super fast, they're like, I don't know. I think, God, you're pretty good, but I think we need a king. I think we need a king to lead us. I don't know if we trust you. And God's like, you don't want a king? That's a bad idea. But they do it anyways. And so they get Saul, and that's a whole story, but he doesn't do a good job. And then we get David, as in like David and Goliath, the, stones, if you've ever heard that story. And David then is a good king. And he starts to figure it out. And he leads them, and he unites Israel, because Israel had split in that time. And then David messes it up. David makes some pretty poor choices. Once again, different story. And the kingdom splits again. His son Solomon does a great job, but he does everything right except for one thing. He says, now you can worship other people than just our God. And through that, so many terrible things happen because the Israelite people walk away from God again. And then a cycle of good king, bad king happens for the next couple thousand years. There's a good king and there's a bad king. There's a good king and there's a bad king. And then at one point they're taken over, and then they come back, and at one point they're taken over, and then they come back. And throughout this story, there's one big theme. The people of God listen to God. Then they think, life's going pretty good. I think I got this. And then it all crashes and burns. And then God's like, why don't you listen to me again? And then they're like, okay, we'll do it. And so on it goes. And God shows his goodness, and he shows his love for his people, but his people just can't figure it out. They miss it over and over and over again. And God has every right to be done with his people. He has every right to say, why can't you just get it? But the reason we're here and the reason for the season is that God looks at those people, and through those Israelite people, he decides that he's not going to let us miss it. And through Jesus, God leaves heaven and becomes a newborn boy, lives a perfect life, and dies a terrible death on the cross for you and for me. And that's the good news. And we see that good news. I skipped over a little scripture there. We see that good news begin when an angel comes through on that promise and descends and tells the good news to Joseph first. This is Matthew chapter 1, if you want to be there. Joseph, son of David, the angel said, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for the child within her was conceived by the Holy Spirit, and she will have a son, and you are to name him Jesus. for he will save his people from their sins. All of this occurred to fulfill the Lord's message through his prophet. Look, the virgin will conceive a child, and she will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, God with us. God, for 4,000 years, has been on a rescue mission for you. And it's so easy to forget why we celebrate. It's so easy, for all of us to miss it. And what's so cool is not only did Jesus do all of those things, but Jesus was a big fan of telling stories. And I really like to tell stories, so I'm glad that Jesus did too. And Jesus told one of the most interesting stories about missing it. Now, this story isn't an actual story that happened. Jesus would often tell fictional stories so that we could get something, so that we could understand more about who he was and what he wanted for our lives. So in Matthew 18, he tells the story of the unforgiving debtor, which is I don't know. Those are just big words for me. I'm not I shouldn't say I'm not smart. I just am not a huge fan of big words. So it's going to make sense, I promise. It's not a super complicated story. So Jesus is telling the story, and it begins like this. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven can be compared. So stopping right there, Jesus is saying, this is what my plan is for you. This is what I want the world to look like, the kingdom of heaven. That's what that means. The kingdom of heaven can be compared to a king who decided to bring accounts up to date with servants who had borrowed money from him. So this king has a bunch of people that owe him a bunch of money. And the king is taking place of God. In the process, one of his debtors was brought in who owed him millions of dollars. I love the NLT because it kind of encapsulates what that means. This guy owed what was the equivalent amount of today's money of millions of dollars. There was no way he could pay it off. He was indebted to the king. And in the time of Jesus, what happened when you couldn't pay your debt is you were enslaved to that person. That person got to do whatever they wanted with you. But this is the kingdom of heaven, and it looks different. The story goes on, but the man fell down before his master and begged him, please be patient with me, and I will pay it all, even though he knew he couldn't. Then his master, the king, was filled with pity for him and released him and forgave his debt. Millions of dollars gone. For some of you in this room, don't miss it. Do not miss your debt being forgiven. If you walked in here today and there is sin that is weighing you down, you feel like the world is on your shoulders because you're shouldering it yourself. You don't have the relationship with Jesus that you need to be released from that sin. What I want you to know is there is a king that wants to forgive your debts. There's a loving Father who sent Jesus to die for you so that you don't have to carry that weight anymore. And 4,000 years ago, he made a promise that he was going to bless you. So as you leave today, oh, that's a bummer. As you leave here today, don't miss it. Be blessed. Be blessed with a relationship with God. He wants to know you, and he wants to remove that burden from you. All you have to do is ask. And as we take communion later today, that's your opportunity to give it to him. And Nick will do a better job of explaining that. But the story goes on. And for all of you in the room who know Jesus and are like, yeah, that's good stuff. Sin, that's bad. I figured that out. Which none of us have really figured it out. But Jesus goes on because the story doesn't end at the forgiveness of sin. Your story doesn't end when Jesus forgives you. Because not only is your life isn't only about being blessed. It's about being a blessing. Blessing other people through your relationship with Jesus. And so the story goes on. But the man left the king, the man who had just had his debts forgiven, and he went to a fellow servant who owed him a few $1,000s. So imagine this. He just got forgiven millions. And there was somebody else who owed him a few $1,000s. And he grabbed him by the throat and demanded instant payment. But his creditor wouldn't wait. He had the man arrested and put in prison until the debt could be paid in full. When some other servants saw this, they were very upset, so they went to the king and told him everything that had happened. And then the king called the man in who he had forgiven and said, "You evil servant, I forgave you that tremendous debt because you pleaded with me. Shouldn't you have mercy on your fellow servant just as I had mercy on you?" For the people in this room who have a relationship with Jesus and know that your debt has been paid, I think we're all guilty of this. The stupid things we can get angry about and just lose it and completely miss that there are people in our lives that don't know that their debt can be paid. I have a funny story of this. Recently, I almost ruined a friendship over a 10-piece McNugget. And that sounds like it's not real, but it is. 2 days ago, I was pretty sick, and I'd been in my room for most of my day, and one of my very kind roommates came up to my room. It was about 11 o'clock, and he was like, "Hey, we're going to McDonald's. Do you want anything?" And I was like, "That's really kind. I'll text you my order." He was like, "Psh, perfect." And then he was gone for an hour, and I was sick, and I didn't really want to stay up, but I was like, I want McDonald's. And I wanted a 10-piece nugget, quarter-pounder meal, and a Sprite. That's my normal McDonald's order. It doesn't look like that's my normal McDonald's order, but that's my normal McDonald's order. And I hear the garage door open, and you know that feeling, like when you're about to eat good food. And I walk downstairs, and I'm sick, so my brain's not in the right spot, and I'm just ready to just take a bag and just walk back upstairs. And I walk downstairs, and my friend Austin looks at me and goes, "Ooh, forgot. My bad." And in that moment, I thought of every terrible thing that he has ever done, and I thought of how I could just verbally destroy him, right? And for once in my life, not often, I was like, okay. And I grabbed some fruit snacks and went upstairs. But there was a moment where I almost ruined a friendship, said things that I would have terribly regretted over 10 chicken nuggets. And it is so easy for us as Christians to miss it. With a coworker, with a spouse, with a friend, that they may not know the good news yet. And you may be the closest thing they see to the King. Be a blessing this week to the person that's missing it, to the person that it is the most difficult. You need to show them what's possible, that their debt is paid in full, that their debt can be forgiven. God has been preparing in your life, God has been preparing to bless you and for you to be a blessing. So just don't miss it. As you go through this week, don't miss the opportunity to be a blessing. As I pray, I want you to think, is this something that you've experienced? Is this my opportunity to be blessed? And secondly, who's the person? Who's the person that needs to know the good news?